pictured here is my first car, and that is me sat on the bonnet and the roof. Now the first thought you may have is, that's a really rubbish picture because the sunlight's behind you and you can't even see anything. I agree. And the second thought may be, well, why have you got your feet on the bonnet and why have you got your arse on the roof? All good points. This wasn't quite my first car, but it was the first car I had once I'd passed my test. Before that, I just had a car that I used to go around with L plates and my dad in the passenger seat. But this, the Capri 1.6LS, I bought from my friend Mike for the princely sum of £120. That's not a bad price considering the car had about 10 months MOT on it and it all worked perfectly well, but it was just rusty and battered and rather unloved looking. And it didn't really get much better from there. The first thing I did with my newly acquired rear wheel drive Ford Capri was see if I could get the back end out. And believe it or not, getting the back end out on one of these is extremely easy, even with a measly 1.6 litre engine that has about 80 brake horsepower. The back end is so light and the rear suspension is so useless that you could push it. You could just sit on a damp road and just lean against it, would probably move all by itself. Of course, many a happy memory was to be had in this particular car. Many a typical kind of happy memory that you can imagine happened in this car. And also many a rather distraught moment when I basically pushed it further than I could realistically contain. There are three main parts to this story. The first one was driving this car around with my brother in his Mark 1 Astra. I had just a tiny bit more oomph and maybe just a bit more bravado, a bit more to prove than he did, and so I went down a bit quicker. But I pulled up, waiting for him to come by, and stopped, and he looked at the front of the car and said, "You've got oil coming out the front of that." And I did, because I managed to hit a rock and sumped it. Then came my first 3 points as a driver. This happened only 2 weeks having passed my test, because I was driving along a 40 limit. I'm sure I told this story somewhere else. I was driving along a 40 limit road doing 28 miles per hour behind someone in a Volvo. And I could see well ahead even though the road was bendy and had double white lines, and I just overtook. And sure enough, a police car was waiting just down the road. 3 points and a fine. The thing is, actually, at the time I was out all the time in the evening, spending what tiny little bit of money I had left on petrol just so I could be out exploring, driving my first car around. It was fantastic. So I did get pulled over by the police quite a lot. Usually for going a bit over the limit, usually for driving around with no lights on because I'd forgotten that, or what have you. But I never really got into any trouble. Until one day, going down a dirt track as well, where Kingsway Business Park now is, I was again trying to get the back end out, which is a bit stupid really on a dirt track, because I did get the back end out, and I got the back end out into a field along with the rest of the car through a barbed wire fence, and I then needed the help from my brother to come along and pull me out of the field, where I discovered I had 3 punctures from the barbed wire fence and a great big ticking off from the man who owned the land. You'd have thought I'd have learned my lesson, but no. One evening, after a rather good drive with my friend Mike, he congratulated me on my driving and said, "You've done really well, you're getting good at this." And so, maybe to celebrate this particular thing, I did actually boot it round a roundabout in second gear in the wet, and it span out of control and into a wall and smashed all the front end up. And that was the end of that car. Although, almost. I did drive it on with a puncture on the front and no lights and stuff, which, it still drove, so why not? Oh, I forgot to mention actually, I almost set fire to it once as well, because I managed to get a cable going across the 2 terminals of the battery and burnt a lot of cable out. And that's it. Then I took it to the scrapyard, where I was given £30 for it. So £100 for a couple of months worth of really enjoyable larking around and getting a bit of experience, not too bad. But whilst in the scrapyard, I saw the most horrible thing. Just left it there, got my £30, walking away, and the car was jumped on like vultures of people wanting things. Parcel shelf, I want that mirror, I want this, and I felt awful. Felt truly awful. Hey ho!